Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, October 22nd. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. Ohio State and Nebraska will kick off their 2020 seasons just 2 days from now. Illinois and Wisconsin play tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow. And the game against Michigan is in 51 days. With the Big Ten kicking off tomorrow, this seemed like a perfect time for a conference season preview show. And when you think college football previews, if you're anything like me, you think Phil Steele. The release of his annual preview book is an unofficial holiday for college football fans across the country. In my house, we call it Steelemas. And my copy is always within arm's reach whenever I need to check something throughout the season. Phil, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, real pleasure, Tom.
Now, this is a show with a largely Ohio State audience, so I guess let's just dive right in, start with the big question that most of them are probably asking. You had Ohio State picked number one preseason. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. Are they still the team you would pick to win the national title right now?
Yeah, I'm sticking with Ohio State. As impressive as Clemson has been, as impressive as Alabama has been, I think when you look at Ohio State and the overall talent they have, I see them getting there this year. They've got the offensive line, they've got the quarterback, and defensively, I think there's plenty of good replacements up front on the D-line. So sticking with Ohio State to win it, but boy, that Clemson team has sure looked good so far.
Yeah, that sure seems like this is setting up for an Ohio State Clemson rematch at some point in the playoff this year. You break down the conference by ranking each individual unit. So the quarterbacks are ranked from number 1 Ohio State to number 14 Rutgers, for example. And you go through each of the position groups like that. Now, the Buckeyes are the top ranked group in the Big Ten in 4 different spots, second in 2 others, third in 2 others. That is more top 3 units than either Alabama or Clemson has in their conference. How big of a talent advantage did the Buckeyes really have over the rest of the conference?
I think it's probably a little bit tighter this year than it was last year, just due to Penn State. I think when you look at Penn State, this is the best team that James Franklin's put on the field in his years. So I think Penn State's a team that's capable of playing with Ohio State. We saw last year in the Big Ten championship game, Wisconsin played with Ohio State. Heck, they were winning that game 21-7 at the half, had a 294, 232-yard edge. So I don't think it's a huge gap. It's not at all like it was in the past couple of years with Clemson and the ACC. I mean, let's face it, it was Clemson, the Grand Canyon, and then I couldn't even tell you who the second best team in the ACC was last year. That's changed this year. That's a lot tighter. And I think there's some challengers for Ohio State in the Big Ten.
Yeah, there have been a couple of years recently when it seemed like the second best team in the ACC might be Clemson's second string. That you get add Notre Dame to that conference, and that suddenly that gap gets a lot smaller.
Plus, North Carolina's a much improved team this year. Miami with De'Ara King's much improved this year. Pitt's got a legitimate defense. I think when you look at also Virginia Tech is a loaded, experienced team with 17 returning starters. I just think overall the conference got a lot better this year.
Yeah, it has been a more competitive league top to bottom for sure this year in the ACC. In the Big Ten, you mentioned them earlier. The second-ranked team in your projections was Penn State. Now, you had them number 8 in the nation preseason. How much does the loss of Micah Parsons, who opted out, and running back Journey Brown, who had a health issue this week, how much does the loss of those two guys impact, and how much does the absence of fans change how you look at the Buckeyes game there in week 2?
Yeah, the absence of fans, I think, would be your biggest issue for that game because, as Urban Meyer has said many times, the whiteout conditions at Penn State is the toughest venue that he ever took his team into as a head coach anywhere. And Penn State with the fans there on a whiteout condition would be an extreme advantage for them. Now, losing Journey Brown is tough because Journey Brown was their top running back, but I tell you what, this team was so deep at running back. Noah Cain, Devin Ford, Keziah Holmes, and they even go back to a couple of true freshmen, Kevion Lee, Tank Smith. They are loaded in the backfield, so I don't think losing Journey Brown is going to affect them all that much. And Micah Parsons, in my mind, was the best linebacker in college football, but once again, the depth this Penn State team has, I think they'll be able to replace them. Maybe not quite. I think the Parsons loss will be felt more than the Journey Brown loss. But in both cases, I've been going over the team with Coach Franklin each of his 7 years there. That first year when he got to Penn State, you look at the team when we were going over them, they barely got a 1 deep that first year. Their second string was loaded with walk-ons, players that had moved from new positions, and players that just wouldn't even be anywhere near making this year's squad. This year they basically basically go three deep at every position with very highly touted players. I mean, so they are a very good team. They were inexperienced last year. They now have experience this year. To me, Penn State's clearly Ohio State's biggest challenger in the Big Ten, and we'll find out pretty soon because they play the second week of the season.
Yeah, it took James Franklin a little while to dig out from those NCAA sanctions. You do not fix a scholarship restriction deficit like they had like that overnight, but it seems like they've kind of gotten back up to the level where they can be a legitimate challenger to Ohio State this year. On the other side of the coin, I have said before that this seems like a year when Michigan could really take a step back. I mean, 4 new starters in the offensive line, new quarterback, no Nico Collins, an almost total rebuild in the secondary. I have them going 4-4 in the regular season. Is that crazy?
Well, they do have a lot more question marks than they've had, especially last year. Last year they had a veteran squad and disappointed, I think, in their overall play. You look at this year's schedule, I think you definitely have to have an underdog at Ohio State. They're a slight favorite at Minnesota in the opener. I think that's a toss-up game. They do draw Wisconsin out of the West, which is going to be a tough game. And, of course, Wisconsin just slaughtered them last year. They get Penn State, which I would definitely favor Penn State in that game. So 4-4 seems to be a possibility this year. I think a lot's going to depend on Joe Milton. The coaches are high on Joe Milton. They feel that he's going to step in, give them that different dimension at the quarterback. They've got better depth at running back than they had last year. Last year they had Haskins and Charbonnet, a couple inexperienced guys at the running back position. They now have experience. They had back in at Chris Evans. The offensive line is a big-time question mark, though, and they underperformed last year. You got all those guys that were playing in the NFL this year, and last year, you look at the stats they put up, they only had 151 yards per game rush, allowed 25 sacks. So to me, the offensive line is probably the biggest question mark on the team.
Now, speaking of things that might have sounded crazy, the team I might be most interested to see this fall is Indiana. Now, this has just felt to me all summer like this is the year the Hoosiers finally get over the hump and beat one of the big three in the East. Whether it's Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, they've been pretty consistently solid under Tom Allen. Got darn close to winning 9 games last year, but they have not kind of gotten over that hump this year. Where do you see the Hoosiers finishing this year?
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them bump past Michigan even in the East this year because they're extremely talented. They've got 16 returning starters coming back. They've got to keep their quarterback healthy and Michael Penix because last year when Penix went down, they had Peyton Ramsey to come off the bench, and Peyton Ramsey did a phenomenal job last year. This year will be Jack Tuttle, the Utah transfer. We'll see if he factors in. But if Penix stays healthy, he's a dangerous runner and thrower. They've got one of the more underrated running backs in the country in Stevie Scott. He's a big back that he's just a special talent. I mean, he's got size, he's got speed, he'll power three. At the receiving core, they've got Whop Villar, who's one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. And then how about Peyton Hendershot at tight end? That's a pretty good receiving core. The offensive line has got 3 NFL prospects on it. The defensive front 7 looks strong. Now, they did lose Marcelino Ball, but I think they'll be fine there. And the secondary looks pretty good. So Tom Allen clearly doing a great job building this team as well. And this is his best team he's put on the field in his 4 years.
The quarterback depth there is definitely a concern. Just for people who don't know, Peyton Ramsey transferred to Northwestern. He's actually supposed to be the starter at Northwestern this year. So you will probably still see him on your BTN at noon at some point this year, but not in an Indiana uniform. On the other side of the conference, who do you see coming out of the West this year to face the Buckeyes in Indianapolis?
Well, last year I didn't pick Wisconsin to win the West. It was one of the rare years I didn't, and they came right back out and said, you know what, forget about it. They won the West. Oh no, what a dominating start to the season they had. They had 4 shutouts in the first 6 games. Now they got 9 starters back on defense. They did lose their 2 big pass rushers though, and Chris Orr and Zach Bond, but I think they'll be solid on defense as always. Their top 6 defensive linemen return, and offensively a quarterback. The Jack Cohn got injured, but yeah, I think Graham Mertz was pushing them for the job as it was. Graham Mertz is their highest rated recruit they ever signed. He was my number 4 rated quarterback out of high school. I think he can step in, do a good job. Probably my biggest question mark with Wisconsin is who's going to be the running back. Will it be Watson, Groshek? Will it be Jalen Berger, the true frosh? Whoever it is, they'll be running behind an offensive line. They'll be fine. They do lose their top receiver last year in Cephas, but this is a Wisconsin team that just reloads every year. And Paul Chryst surprised me last year with the type of year they had. So I'm picking Wisconsin to win the West, but there's going to be a battle out there in the West.
Now, one of the things that I think has been pretty consistent in a lot of places across the country is it's perceived as a Wisconsin-Minnesota potentially battle in that West. You had Minnesota picked tied for third in the Big Ten over the summer, or in the Big Ten West over the summer with Northwestern. Where do you see the Gophers potentially taking a step back this year?
I think when you look at Minnesota last year, they took on a lot of teams that had backup quarterbacks. They took on a soft schedule, and early on last year, they just weren't that impressive. I mean, they played South Dakota State, Fresno State, Georgia Southern. They could easily have lost all three of those games last year. In fact, they were fortunate that they pulled out 3 wins in all close games. Then they took on a backup quarterback against Purdue, a backup quarterback against Illinois, a backup quarterback against Nebraska. They beat Rutgers. They beat Maryland. Now, they did play a very good game against Penn State. They beat Northwestern, but I don't know if they're quite there yet as far as being that overall one of the most talented teams. And they played, when I wrote the magazine, they were playing a pretty tough schedule. Schedule lightened up a little bit for them this year. If they get past Michigan in the opener, you know they get past Maryland and Illinois the next 2 games. But only 4 starters back on defense would be a little bit of a concern. So I just think Minnesota wasn't quite as good as 11-2 last year. They got there as a product of the schedule.
All right, and give me one more team in the league that you think is going to be a surprise to people, either in a good or bad way this year.
Yeah, my surprise team is clearly Northwestern. You look at the Wildcats. A lot of folks look at last year, and they finished 3-9, and they finished 3-9 because their offense was feeble. I mean, they got poor quarterback play throughout the entire year, average only 16 points per game. But what they don't remember is 2 things. Northwestern still had a good defense last year. In fact, they only allowed 336 yards per game. They're a top 20 defense last season. They've got 9 starters back on the defensive side of the ball. They got Patty Fisher at linebacker. You look at the secondary, they've got an excellent cornerback tandem in Greg Newsome and J.R. Pace. That's a legitimate defense Northwestern has. And the second thing people forget about, this team was in the Big Ten championship game just 2 years ago until last year things went bad. Now, we had talked about Peyton Ramsey earlier. I think he's going to have a huge impact at Northwestern. Give them that quality quarterback play that they were missing last year. They now have a veteran offensive line. They've got playmakers at running back with Bowser and Anderson and Hull if they can stay healthy. Each of those guys got banged up last year, and they've got some talent at the receiver spot. So I think that Northwestern is going to be a surprise team, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them contending for the Big Ten West title this year.
All right, and I want to get you out of here on this. Right now, it looks like Clemson and Alabama are a pretty clear top 2 of teams that have played so far. You obviously have Ohio State in your playoff field as well. Right now, who do you think ends up being that 4th team that gets into the playoff this year?
You know, I'm going to go a little bit out of the box in this one, and I'm going to take Texas A&M. And the reason I would go with Texas A&M over Georgia, although I feel Georgia might be the slightly better team than Texas A&M to grab that number 4 spot, is Georgia, if they win the East, is still going to have to play Alabama again. Meanwhile, with Texas A&M, you look at the rest of their schedule. They host Arkansas, they travel to South Carolina, Tennessee, host Mississippi, host LSU, and play Auburn on the road. They could very well run the table. They wouldn't have to play an SEC championship game against Georgia theirs because they would have lost to Alabama. And if your only loss all year is to Alabama, I think they have a shot at getting there. So I'm going to go with Texas A&M as a sneaky pick to make the playoff this year, and that number 4 spot behind the Titans, Clemson, Alabama, and for Ohio State. And for all those folks that are clamoring for an 8 or 16 team playoff this year, you got to wonder why. I mean, you know Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, and you sort of scramble just to find a 4th team this year.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a pretty big drop-off between 3 and 4 last year. It seems like it might be shaping up to be that way this year as well. If you want to do some last-minute studying before Saturday, Phil's 2020 edition is still on sale. Phil, let people know where they can get that and what they can find on your website as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tom. And, the magazine's out there, and I know a lot of folks in Big Ten country said, you know what, I'm not buying the magazine this year because the Big Ten's not playing. Well, guess what? The Big Ten's playing. And all the information's still pertinent in the magazine. All the stuff that you normally get in the preseason, it's all still pertinent. But the only thing that's different is the schedule. And if you go to philsteele.com, you could print off the schedules. We've got them 2 up on every page in full color. Print off the schedules, and you could paste them right in your magazine, and that makes it 100% up to date. Now, it's different this year than past years. The magazine is only available at 2 locations. Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. So head to your local Barnes & Noble, head to your local Books A Million, pick up a copy while they're still there. Then go ahead and print off the Big Ten schedules, paste them in your magazine, and you'll be ready for the start of the season. So only Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or philsteele.com is the website.
All right. Well, Phil, thank you for joining us. I picked up my copy this year at the Barnes & Noble out of Easton a couple months ago, so they should have them there as well. So, Phil, thank you for joining us. Make sure you check out all of our great podcasts from the Buckeye Scoop Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud. You can just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those great shows, and you can leave us a 5-star rating and review while you're there, as well as subscribe to get those episodes dropped to you as soon as they come out. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.